So, John, thank you for taking the time today. I have a very few warm-up questions. So, how did you land your current job? So, I know that you started off with a logistics background, or basically in the KIMO'S Logistics University. So, how did you take the turn to land the job in the Chinese startup landscape, and why AI in the end?
Okay, so it's a story of 4 years now. So a lot of things have happened. After graduating from my as you mentioned logistics background, I went straight to China because my goal was to actually found my own startup company. I was looking at different markets, and in the end, China proved to be the market for me because I was comparing, in this case, China and South America. And I made the choice to go to China, also because I started learning the language. So I went to China to start my first company, but my thought was, before I can start my own company in China, I obviously need to speak the language. So what I did at first, I learned the language for 8 months until I dropped out of the language program and started my first startup company as a first-time founder with the co-founders I've met at Tsinghua University. Tsinghua University is one of the best universities in China, and the reason I went there is because Beijing, the city where Tsinghua is based, is the tech capital, still software tech capital in China still. And Tsinghua has the best tech talent. And obviously my thought was, hey, we can find tech talent there. And in general, there's a great landscape of universities. So there's a lot of talent and innovation. So I went to Beijing, studied for 8 months Chinese, jumped to the first company. It was actually, in this case, it was a photography platform where we essentially matched people who want to take a photo with photographers, hobby photographers, kind of Uber style or Didi style, which is the Chinese equivalent. They can see a map where the photographer is. They know where you are. They come, they take pictures, they upload them to the app. You can find them there. They edit it, you pay over the app. That was our idea. It was an interesting start. We had a co-founding team of 4 people. We had a team of like 6, 7. And yeah, it was just an interesting way to start my kind of like startup journey. We pivoted twice, but the end was the same, that I actually ended up leaving the company. I had kind of not a fallout, but ethical differences with my co-founder. And after around 1.5 years, it was a personal failure for me. And that was my first startup. Then after around half a year break, I started my second company, now called Unpack. We're rebranding from unpackAI to Unpack now, right? Because we are kind of a collective of different kind of tech learning communities, meaning we are an education company. And what we do is that we have code-based programs. We teach AI, we teach Python, we teach different kind of math things. And we build these around different kind of learning communities. So we build learning communities, we build program systems, video content, and then we build these different kind of learning communities with the aim to build a tribe, or a digital tribe of lifetime learners. That's our vision.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm doing now. I've been building this for about 1 year. We registered our company last year in March, so we almost have a 1-year anniversary. But that's what I've been doing in China, and now I'm currently in Germany. Yeah.
Okay, that's super interesting. So AI space, and you saw the opportunity of actually exploiting AI in China because it's obviously a market where the government is only involved if they have actually political interest. Otherwise, they let the market more or less freely do whatever it wants. And so you had the opportunity to actually exploit any opportunities and actually scale faster. Because as I know, like in China, you have 2x unicorns what you have in the US. So China is a really fast growing market, and a lot of people just take the risk of growing something. And not like in Germany, where we're more like secure and uncertainty avoidant. Yeah. So what was your contact with Chinese venture capital until now? I think you said you actually started and co-founded 2 companies, and your current company you're also co-founding probably with a team of another person and also some employees. What was your contact with venture capital in this regard?
Yeah. So we started trying to raise venture capital with my first company. So it's also heavily kind of like aimed by my co-founder at the point of time. My co-founder at that point of time, he actually came from Harvard, graduated, had a double degree MBA from Harvard, came to China, was a American-born Chinese, Also great guy. We actually got along still quite well. And the aim to fund ourselves was to get access to provide more resources toward more talent. And we had many meetings with Chinese venture capitalists. There are like a few huge ones, like Sequoia. China is still worldwide the best performing venture capital, even like better than their main, the American one. Gen Fund is still great, and there are a few others that we were in touch with, but obviously not easy to get in because, I mean, we were a mainly foreign team trying to raise Chinese money from Chinese venture capitalists. And that was a tough challenge because we obviously had to prove ourselves that we can do things better than potential other Chinese companies. And it was super tough. So in hindsight, I don't think it was the right move. Because it's super tough to raise. I don't know, like I think it's super tough to raise funding if you don't have the right context.
Right.
And the chance is that if you're trying to raise funding in a different country you're not originally from, is that you don't have better context than other startup companies. And
so you would say that the Chinese venture capital market is extremely competitive, right? Also compared to the US market.
Yeah, it's super competitive, and it's very, I mean, you obviously say, hey, it's all based on relationships, but I would say even more so in the Chinese ecosystem. So essentially, obviously, being a foreign-based startup, we don't have as many relationships than a Chinese-based startup. And we're trying to compete directly with Chinese startups. We didn't even build an international product. So I think that was kind of our misdirection there. I think what we should have done probably, if we locate ourselves as a foreign-based team, we should have built a product that is either going out of the market or inside the market. So maybe essentially providing service to Chinese companies going out or foreign companies going in. But we weren't doing that, so we couldn't really use our foreign identity as a strength. It was kind of like something we tried to negotiate as it's not a bad weakness. Anyway, so the strategy there was, I don't think, very, very effective. And therefore, we really struggled. We invested a lot of time we got quite far. So if you want to do raise fund, the process, I think, is very similar than it is in the US. You do have a lot of meetings until you can actually get a TS, a term sheet, and that outlines the terms. And once you have that, you more or less have always secured funding. They can still do something wrong, but anyway, so that was the process. We were very close to getting one term sheet, but unfortunately didn't turn out. Also again, as I was saying before, we didn't have a good strategy, and also I don't think we were yet at the point to actually raise actual funding, because we needed more user numbers, we need more revenue, and we didn't really have promising numbers just yet. That's just it.
Go for it.
That was just experience with the first startup that I made. And that made me to not wanting to raise funding with my second company, but firstly focus on actually having revenue and users data before we actually start raising funding, because there's no point to raise funding if you don't really have that. That's just my opinion now. Yeah.
Did you feel any influence from government policies on raising funding? Did you feel like we have to confirm with certain government guidelines? Or did you feel like the people who give you venture capital really wanted to make sure that you're also in line with like data protection with the Chinese government? Nothing really goes out. Did you need to have a Chinese partner to actually get funding, or were like detached from any government policies that you have to take care of that or pay attention to that?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a big question. So first of all, hey, do you need a Chinese founder? I think so. I have a friend of mine who raised funding from an institutional VC in China as a foreigner. So it's possible to actually even do that with having a fully foreign company. But having a Chinese co-founder and having a legal representative being fully Chinese, it helps to get over certain legal barriers.
Right.
If the second question regards to getting funding from the government, like subsidies, whatever, there are a lot of offers. However, it's actually I think it's quite, like, from my experience, like they all make it sound super attractive, all these different kind of offers of subsidies, but to actually get it is not easy. There's a long process, a lot of requirements. Some are like you have to exist for only 2 years. like I don't know, I think there's a lot of like, oh yeah, you get all this money from the government, push innovation, blah 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 blah, but actually in the end, it's not never as promising, because sometimes it's not even cash. It's like, oh, you get 2 million in office, like, so you don't have to pay for an office, which you don't have to do in a lot of accelerators anyways. So it's not even like what you really need as a startup, because you need some capital, some fresh capital where you don't have to give out equity optimally, but it's just difficult to get that very reliably from a government subsidy, from my experience.
Okay, so how do you think your network basically helped you? I think you also, it says on your LinkedIn, basically the managing director of the GINN Beijing. So how did that come about, and like how did that?
Yeah. So okay. So GINN is essentially something we kind of actually. Kevin is also part of that. Kevin Werner. He's also part of that. It was initially an idea that wasn't by two very high connected Germans in the startup ecosystem that wanted to have a bigger platform for Germans in the ecosystem. They're like, the French have a great chapter in like French tech, and other kind of, but Germany didn't really have a very effective leader. They're just junioren, but they didn't really were very integrated into the startup ecosystem, from my experience. So that was the initial idea, also from the co-founders, Jelte and Katja. However, unfortunately, due to COVID, the development of GINN was kind of like very interrupted a little bit. So yeah, I mean, it's a nice network to build still, that German, like kind of like a German network where people can kind of connect. But it's not currently, it's not more necessarily than a nice network of German in China interested about the startup ecosystem, connecting with Chinese nationals or other nationals in China also interested in Chinese. So it's right now it's unfortunately more than that. But we actually initially organized a lot of events, innovation centers with the Chamber of Commerce, German Chamber of Commerce. So it actually had a good development until COVID kind of fit, and that kind of like interrupted the development a little bit, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, like if the question you mentioned, how does relationships and help? I mean, luckily I had now some relationships with some of the Chinese accelerators, and getting into some curtain, like it's just super, super helpful. I am unfortunately not really of the experience of the having a very strong relationship of a very strong VC. That also helps. But having, like, for example, a good relationship to corporates also helps to get like certain like contracts there. Like, for example, it would help us, like if we had a good relationship to a dean of a very famous school, right? Then we could actually get like anyway, so like, it helps a lot, but unfortunately I'm not yet in a position where I can say, hey, I have a very strong contact in a very specific industry which I really need and which can directly help me, because it's also super rare even in Germany, I think. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, Emma has two last questions here. So the first one would be, so you basically mentioned you had this strong community, basically, that also Kevin Werner is part of, and that really helped you to understand the landscape better to a certain degree. How did this help you when basically the Chinese government cracked down on big tech? Were you able to see the changes and the impact sooner? And how is your current business model basically affected by the regulatory changes? And how do you prepare for this uncertain and complex environment in the future? I mean, it can happen, for example, if you go, I said, unpackAI. To my understanding, it's also, to a certain extent, an edtech company. And those edtech companies are highly regulated under Chinese law, right?
Yeah, so, okay, I mean, like, GINN was kind of early in its stage, and I kind of started pushing forward to kind of use my network to kind of like push GINN forward. So I don't really think that through like GINN or like any other, like I was earlier able to see the regulatory change. I saw it when it came in the news, but luckily, obviously, we're not that big yet, right? So we don't have a lot of government attention just yet. Secondly, though, something we just said, hey, we could have argued, hey, why don't we, like, we were thinking, why don't we collaborate with some secondary schools or primary schools to provide more AI education? We actually think of that. We had someone from Inner Mongolia, someone who I could have reached out to, But we didn't do that because private education for, like secondary primary school, for younger kids, that's received a lot of crackdown, as you mentioned. However, if we provide training to adults, managers, that's still like very valid. I mean, and even so like we're still too small to even receive regulatory punishments or like whatever. But luckily, we also kind of like strategically adjust ourselves to focus on adults education.
And that's interesting. Yeah. So basically, your focus really helps you move around this Chinese law barrier. So my last question: do you have any personal anecdote that you would like to share with our audience? Maybe to also people who would like to step in your footpath, basically say, okay, I'm super interested in innovation. China is like a fast-growing market. I would like to make some move from a Western country to China and getting started. What would be like the anecdote or like the first step that they should take in mind and they should be aware of?
I mean, honestly, right now it's a very difficult question to ask because right now it's very difficult to get into China. Even I struggle with having a Chinese company. I struggled. I mean, like my anecdote, my current life experience, that I came to Germany for holidays of maybe 1 or 2 months. I came in the beginning of December and I'm still here. So it's already 3 months and I will only be able to get back in the middle of April. So I think if someone is really eager to go to China, even right now, in regards to innovation, it's just difficult to get there over universities, which was easier before, or through kind of just coming there and finding a job locally. It's just almost impossible right now. So if someone's really still interested to do that, I mean, like find a job in an actual company who can actually provide the relocation package. However, they would only do that if you actually have a certain skill and if you've seen a position. So essentially right now it's almost impossible to actually find a job there. I guess what you can, do, maybe for now you can work with a company who allows to work with you, from abroad, right? You don't have to be in China. But once the kind of like regulatory changes happen, you can then actually transition more easily because you've already made the connections. So I guess right now it's almost impossible, but if you're not from a very senior role, but I guess it's not too late, I know it's not too late, and to start making the connections to prepare for a future move to China.
So the physical move has to be planned on in the long term, and people can only prepare now in the Western country to work with Chinese entities and makes this move in the future. I mean, it's obviously very attractive to be in the startup landscape. It's super exciting. I see basically when I interviewed you now, like you're full of passion about the future. I mean, you're not just like sitting in an office, just like, okay, the next day is probably some tickets again, or I actually have to just do my daily routine for the next 40 years. But something interesting happens every day, and something changes every day, especially AI. And robotics in China is a big topic. So you're at basically it's a very intersection of chaos and order and innovation and new stuff that's happening. So yeah, super exciting to have been able to talk to you today.
That sounds nice when you say it, but when you actually do it, it's actually not. It's very difficult. And maybe at some time you wish, as a startup founder, hey, it's actually super tough. Maybe it would be nicer to just follow a traditional career, which is also actually has its own way benefits. I don't think there's anything better about either of the ways. Obviously, you can say it's exciting, but can at the same time be also very excruciating. Yeah, that's just my comment towards that.